There are thousands of reincarnation cases that have been reported and analysed in detail by professional experts such as the late Dr Ian Stevenson, who has done detailed research into this fascinating subject. The following cases are stories that might make you question your current beliefs. Number 8. Jeff Keene, who claimed he was John B. Gordon. Keene's story began in 1991 while vacating with his wife. They'd stopped in Sharpsburg, Maryland, where the Civil War Battle of Antietam was fought. Keene had a strong urge to visit the battlefield. While walking through the field, Keene had the following strange wave of grief, sadness and anger washing over him, and he became emotional. Before leaving Sharpsburg, Keene and his wife visited a gift shop, where he purchased a Civil War magazine on the Battle of Antietam. When he later read the magazine, he turned to a page that featured a picture of General John Gordon. Keene was shocked to see he was the spitting image of him. Keene learned that General Gordon nearly died after incurring multiple gunshot wounds during the Battle of Antietam. Keene recalled that it was at that field that he had the profound emotional experience a year before. Keene then found more parallels in their physical appearance, in looks, height, eye colour, birthmarks, personality traits, and even writing styles. Both men preferred to stand with their arms crossed. Keene discovered that in 1862, when General Gordon was 30 years old, he was wounded in the face during the Battle of Antietam. On Keene's 30th birthday in 1977, he began having a severe pain in his jaw, which grew steadily worse, and after tests, found no cause and eventually went away. Keene realised that the 3 markings he'd had on his face matched where General Gordon was wounded. Keene was not only receiving confirmation of a past life, he had also taken on his physical traits. Number 7. Titu Singh, who claimed she was Suresh Verma. In December 1983, a boy named Titu Singh was born near Agra in northern India. At age 4, he began to insist that his name was Suresh Verma and that his wife, Uma, and his 2 children lived in Agra and were owners of a radio shop. He pleaded with his present parents to take him back home and rejected them as his real parents and insisted on being called Suresh. He also said he'd been murdered by 2 men. He remembered that he had arrived home in his car and had sounded his horn so that his wife would open the gate. 2 men came towards him and had shot him in the head. He even knew the names of the 2 men. The one that had fired the shot was a businessman called Jahadian. On visiting Agra, it was discovered there was a shop with the name Suresh Radio, and the owner of the shop had been murdered. There was also a woman called Uma Verma, whose husband, called Suresh, had been murdered but was unsolved. When Titu later visited Agra, he knew where the shop was and met the family whom he knew. When inspecting marks on Titus's head, they found a dent on the right side of his head, like the mark a bullet made on entering the skull. Other side of the head, where the bullet had exited the skull, they found a star-shaped scar. Titu later named his murderer, and when the Agra police questioned the man, he confessed to the murder. Number 6. David Llewelyn. David was born in England in 1970 and as a child had nightmares of large holes smelling of rotting bodies and people with guns. David remembered past life images of people who were prisoners of war living in wooden huts. Dr Stevenson interviewed David, who recalled past life memories of being put into a pit with other bodies. When David began to read and write, he'd read and write from right to left, which is how the Hebrew language is read and written. Teachers would try to correct him, but David continued to write from right to left. David asked his mother whether the food had blood in it, a reference to kosher meat. Whilst visiting the city, David looked at a synagogue and told his parents they wear caps there. David was referring to kippahs, the Jewish headwear. When David drew pictures, he would always include a star, but also feared stars. They visited a shop and saw a necklace with the Star of David attached to it. He cried and ran out into the street. David said that the necklace with the Star of David seemed to be calling him. David hated the colour yellow, where Nazis made Jews wear yellow stars on their clothing. David also had a strong fear of camps and German speaking. When his mother told him that people have holidays at camps, David replied, "There is no happiness in camps, as people were skeletons in cages and were bald, hungry, cold and frightened. And why did it happen?" David's mother insisted that David did not learn of the Holocaust or Jewish customs. Number 5. Peter Avery. Peter Avery was born in Derby, England, in 1923. He attended the University of London, where he graduated in 1949 with a degree in Arabic and Persian languages. Peter later took a job working for the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company and was stationed in the southwest region of Iran. In the winter of 1949-50, a manager from the company's London office, Mr. John Evans, was planning to visit Iran and he needed an interpreter to travel with him. Peter was assigned to escort Mr. Evans on a trip to central Iran, of which Peter had never visited. Peter described to Mr. Evans in detail the route that they would take from their hotel to the city's bazaar, and Mr. Evans was surprised by Peter's extensive knowledge of the streets, considering Peter had never been there before. Peter admitted that he naturally seemed to know the way. Peter then took Mr. Evans to a theological complex built in 1706, a blue-domed mosque that sits in the garden of the complex. As soon as Peter and Mr. Evans walked into the courtyard, Peter experienced a flood of emotions. Peter explained that, "I burst into uncontrollable sobbing under an overwhelming impression that I had somehow come home, yet I'd never visited the place before." Number 4. KEMAL ATASOY, who claimed he was Fistik Karakas. Professor Keel from Australia interviewed KEMAL ATASOY, a 6-year-old boy in Turkey, who recalled details of a previous life he had lived in Istanbul, and that his family's name had been Karakas, who had been a rich Armenian who lived in a large 2-story house. Next door lived a woman named Asst, a well-known personality who had left the country because of legal problems. KEMAL said that his house had been on the water, where boats were tied up with a church behind. People called him Fistik, and his wife and children had Greek first names. He said he carried a large leather bag and only lived in the house for part of the year. When Professor Keel and his interpreter went to Istanbul, they found the neighbour's house of a seagull, and next door was an empty 3-story residence that precisely matched KEMAL's description, near the edge of the water with boats and a church behind it. Professor Keel met an elderly man in the neighbourhood who said that an Armenian family had definitely lived there many years before. The professor made a 3rd trip to the area and interviewed a local historian who said that a rich Armenian had lived in the house and his family's name was Karakas. His wife was Greek and the couple had 3 children. That the Karakases lived in another part of Istanbul and dealt in leather goods, and Fistik often carried a large leather bag. He also said that the deceased man lived in the house only during the summer months of the year and had died about 1941. Number 3. Dolores Jay, who claimed she was Gretchen Gottlieb. In the 1960s, Dolores' husband experimented with hypnosis, and in the 70s, when Dolores started getting back pain, he conducted a session to help relieve his wife's pain. When under hypnosis, he asked her, "Does your back hurt?" And she replied in German, "Nein." In a later session, Dolores said in German, "Ich bin Gretchen," and spoke only German. A native German speaker was invited to talk with Gretchen, where she wrote 40 words in German. The handwriting of Gretchen was different than the handwriting of Dolores, yet Dolores had never learned German. She said her name was Gretchen Gottlieb, and she lived with her father Hermann, who was old with white hair. Her mother Erika had died when she was 8 years old. Gretchen's father was the mayor of Eberswald, Germany, where they lived, and that Eberswald was a small town with a bakery, butcher shop, church and college, with a forest and river outside the town. Gretchen was Roman Catholic, who was opposed to the Protestant Reformation and referred to Martin Luther as a troublemaker. Gretchen was fearful of the Bundesrat, which was a cabinet in Germany that was active from 1875 to 1900. So it was assumed that Gretchen lived in the late 19th century and died when she was 16. At times Gretchen did not seem to realise that she was dead and thought that she was speaking to people on the street near her home and would plead to them that she had to go home, as her father would be upset if he found she was talking to strangers. Number 2. Swarnlata Mishra, who claims she was Bia Pathak. Swarnlata Mishra was born in Pradesh in India in 1948. When she was 3 years old, she claimed her name was Bia Pathak. She had 2 sons and she died in 1939. She gave details of the house she'd lived in and could locate the house near Katni, and near the house were furnaces and a girls' school. In 1959, the case reached Professor Banerjee, a researcher of the Paranormal and College of Dr Stevenson. Banerjee met Swarnlata to see if her past memories could be verified. After her descriptions, he was able to locate the house, which belonged to the Pathak family. The furnaces and the school did exist behind the property. He interviewed the family and verified everything Swarnlata had said. Bia Pathak had died in 1939, leaving behind a husband and 2 sons. Neither the Mishra or Pathak family had ever met. In 1959, Bia's previous family journeyed to the town where Swarnlata now lived to question her and arrived unannounced. Swarnlata immediately recognised all of her previous family. She then came to Bia's husband and said his name and also identified her son Murli. She reminded her previous husband that he had taken 1,200 rupees Bia kept in a box, which he admitted he had taken, and that only he and Bia could have known about. Number 1. Gus Taylor, who claimed he was Augie Taylor. Gus started to recall his previous life as his grandfather, Grandpa Augie, when he was about 18 months old. During a nappy change, Gus told his father that he used to change his father's nappies. One evening, when Gus was 4, he and his parents were looking at old photos of his grandfather, which they brought to the house following Gus's grandmother's funeral. Although he had never seen the photos, Gus was able to pick out his grandfather in group pictures and identify his grandfather's car, stating that it was his car. He also recalled that his sister was murdered, which is when his parents really took notice. Something that the 4-year-old was never told was that Augie's sister had been murdered, her body dumped into the San Francisco Bay.